Today on CityCast Boise. This year, our restaurant scene felt like a revolving door, with some spots closing while flashy new options opened and big chains continued to expand. But is Boise's appetite for restaurants hitting its limit? We're looking at what's driving these trends and whether local independent restaurants can survive this crowded, shifting market. It's Thursday, December 19th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. I'm chatting with our Hey Boise newsletter editor Blake Hunter and our executive producer Frankie Barnhill about the dining trends they saw this year. Thank you both for joining me today.
So good to be here and to talk about food and restaurants.
It's always we want to talk about that.
I was going to say, who doesn't love a chance to talk about food?
Yeah, truly.
So I want to know, probably from both of you, what were the big food or restaurant stories that you saw emerge in Boise this year?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. Lots of openings, lots and lots of openings. So many new restaurants came on board in 2024 to see so much new energy, new chefs on the scene, new people creating different menus. And with that, it feels very frothy.
I think frothy is actually a really good descriptor, Frankie. I love that. I think that there were a lot of openings. I think that for me, the kind of headline switched up in fall, where we had a lot of openings in the summer. And I think Boise really maybe hit its stride in the food scene in the summer. And then in the fall, things started slowing down. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today was kind of prompted by this recurring article that I've been writing every month about restaurant openings and restaurant closures. And so that's been a good way to kind of just keep a metric of what's closing and what's opening and how those two things balance out. So over the fall and the winter, I kind of feel like we've been leaning more towards the closure side. So I might be a little bit of the negative Nancy here, but I think that it's all to, within the context of the pandemic still, is the economy is really trying to move on from the pandemic. And we know that people just can't because it's still an illness that's being spread. And so there's this weird dynamic between the two where the people are trying to figure out how to deal with the impact of the pandemic still. And that's maybe most prevalent in the food industry.
And, not to dive too deeply into economics in a podcast we're doing about restaurants, do you feel like there's this tension point? I get a sense of it, but I'm curious what both of you think about this and its effect on the dining industry in Boise. But it feels like there's this tension where I keep hearing the economy's great. We've bounced back. Everything's great. But maybe my own wallet doesn't reflect that. It feels like things are tighter. It feels like there's a tension point where I'm being told everything's great. You go out to eat. But I don't always feel like I have that same level of income I did have pre-pandemic. It feels like everything's just more expensive. Is that part of what's going on here?
Absolutely. I mean, it takes one trip out to any restaurant to know that prices have gone up. But that applies for the grocery store too. So I think that just food in general, food costs across the board, people are just trying to figure out what the heck to do. And that's in my household too. So yeah, I totally feel you there. And that's a huge part of this conversation. I don't think that's too deep right off the front end at all.
No, I don't think so either. It is interesting, we talked about this idea of quote unquote a vibe session. People are, maybe seeing their wages still go up, but they're still just feeling anxious or things are just not quite right. The housing market, of course, is the looming thing in the background always in Boise. So, the U.S. has been a place where grocery prices have long been so much lower than other places in the world. But seeing that squeeze, so then people are thinking, well, how am I going to, pencil this out if I can't even fully afford the groceries I thought I could? I do think, though, it's kind of interesting because depending on who you talk to in the market, some people are doing pretty well. Some restaurateurs have made 2024 a good year for them for different reasons.
Yeah, it definitely feels like going out to eat can be one of those bonus items that feels like an easy cut for it,
Right.
at least
It's
for
like
me.
the first thing to go,
yeah,
right?
yeah, where it's like,
Yeah.
we're running a little low on money. I'm not going to run out and get, a big meal out at a restaurant. I need to save some money. That's an easy way to make a cut. So I'm really curious how that's affected local businesses, because I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. And you both spoke to some local restaurant owners about their experiences this year. So how was 2024 for their businesses?
Yeah, I spoke to two different people, and on purpose, I spoke to people who have restaurants in different locations in Boise to get some location diversity as well as price point diversity. So I spoke with Tara Morgan from Susina. She opened Susina on Orchard. You might remember she and her husband owned Wild Plum Events in the same location on Orchard for several years. They really struggled during the pandemic under Wild Plum and had to pivot and pivot and pivot. And when I spoke with her, like the trauma of COVID and the COVID years on the restaurant industry, and she said like it's very still prevalent in her mind. It definitely was like the first thing she wanted to talk about. But the good news is that this year, she said that they don't feel burned out, number one, which is actually the first time they haven't felt burned out. They pivoted to this new model with Susina, which is like 11 to 13 tables. It's prefix 4-course dinner for $75. So that's like a date night, a nice date night. But honestly, $75 for a prefix meal that's like really high quality, that's keeping costs low in my mind. But they're on the bench. So that's an interesting note that we can talk about more. And then I also spoke with Dave Crick, who owns Bitter Creek, Red Feather, Diablo and Sons, all on that 8th Street walkway there. And he's been around for a long time. He opened Bitter Creek in like 1996. So wanted to get a sense from him with a long view, but his 3 restaurants have different price points too. And overall, he said that 2024 was kind of a soft landing is the term he used as compared to previous years coming out of the pandemic. So not a year where like they were doing gangbusters, but they were doing better than in previous years during the pandemic.
So maybe, does it seem like the sense you got from both owners kind of an upswing a little bit, or just not as scrimping and holding on by your fingernails?
More the latter. I don't think any restaurant owner you ever will talk with is like, I'm rich. Like things are going great. Like it's a business that operates on notoriously thin margins. But both of them, for different reasons, felt like 2024 was a pretty good year for them.
Meanwhile, there are other folks who have said that they've had a pretty rough year. I think that it's, Frankie, you phrased those people, like those people sounded like they phrased it as like, we almost got by lucky. Like, we kind of, we got through.
Sure.
And some people are not feeling that way. I spoke with Wepa Cafe owner Art Robinson. Wepa is this incredible Puerto Rican place in Garden City. And he's kind of, in conversation with obviously a lot of local restaurateurs. And just across the board, it seems like a lot of people are just talking about business being really down. We're talking about more than 20%, in some cases 30% this year. And so, yeah, I mean, youch, like that's huge. I mean, we're, like you said, narrow margins for restaurants for sure. That's not a narrow margin in the other way that you want, So I think that there are a lot of restaurants, especially small restaurants. I think it's worth mentioning like Wepa is just a few years old. So I think that there's less built-in kind of stability from pre-pandemic to kind of help stabilize out. I think that that's part of what we're seeing. But also it's just, there's so many other factors. So Wepa being in Garden City, in a place that is like still seeing development and
construction, right?
Yeah, has kind of been promised development that hasn't quite come through yet. And so it's places that restaurateurs are community builders and oftentimes and want to kind of build out what the town can look like. And so they're taking risks, lots of different kinds of risks. And often end up in places that you can't just like stumble across. And essentially that's anywhere outside of downtown in Boise. Like we talk here on the show, we talk about the bench a lot as just like this incredible food scene that's maybe a little bit underrated. It's a little underpriced. And I think that that's still very true, but like you still have to go to the bench. Even if you live on the bench, you probably have to drive or bike. And only a certain few people can actually walk to some restaurant on the bench. And that's certainly true everywhere else in the city. And so I think that, you know, again, with restaurants comes growth, construction, like we've talked about. It comes price points that are completely out of anyone here's control, but also it's transportation. You know, it's infrastructure. It's all of these things all together.
Do you also think, I mean, like Frankie, you got a chance to talk to the owner of Bitter Creek. They've been here a long time. I think at this point we could call them a legacy restaurant. Yeah. Do you think that there is something about these legacy restaurants, people know about them, have known about them for years, that gives them a bit of a leg up where these newer restaurants are trying to break in at this point that is very tricky? Budgets are tight for a lot of people. And so, you know, if they're thinking about going out, are they thinking about like, well, I know this restaurant. I know I had a good experience here, where maybe a newer restaurant feels like a gamble, or they don't know about it, or, you know, because budgets are tight, they aren't looking into restaurants as much as they used to. So they don't think about these new spots.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I know that sometimes I feel that way, where I'm like, too many choices. Just go with my old standard. You know, like I'm going to go to the place that I know the wait staff. I know what the food is. I know what the price point's going to be. I know that's in my budget or whatever. And I know I'm going to get a good meal because I've been there for years. And that's where this moment in Boise's food scene is so fascinating, because at the same time that there's so much enthusiasm for the new, I do think that depending on your long-standing reputation in town, there'll be those stalwarts that, like, you know, Bitter Creek's always going to have a customer base. I'm sure Dave Crick's happy to hear that I said that out loud. It seems like that's true, at least for the foreseeable future. Although he did say that there's also more competition across the Treasure Valley. So he's seeing, and he thinks it's a good thing, that, you know, if you live in Nampa, you don't necessarily need to drive down to downtown Boise for a good meal anymore. You can have a really good meal in Nampa. Same with Meridian, Caldwell, Eagle, etc. And so for the downtown Boise restaurants, I think it'll be interesting to see who their customer base is. Is it, you know, truly people in Boise, and even truly like people who live in downtown Boise with all of the downtown apartments that are going up? But yeah, I think overall, I think you make a good point.
I'm curious what both of you think. Do you think people's dining out habits have completely changed because of the pandemic? Maybe forever, this is our new normal. Or do you think it's just that people have less money to spend on extras like going out to a restaurant?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good question. And actually, I want to springboard a question back at both of you just to get kind of hear what you think about this. So Art from WEPA kind of mentioned this, and he was like, we do not have market statistics to back this up. He's like, this is just like a hypothesis that a few people have. Maybe couples are spending $200 to $300 a month on one particular meal, kind of one splurge, one going out meal a month, instead of multiple smaller meals at multiple different restaurants throughout the month. And I've been sitting with that ever since he said that to me and kind of brought that up, and I'm trying to figure out how true I think it is. But I'm curious, what do you two think about that? Do you feel like he's onto something there?
I look forward to 2, maybe 3 good date nights a month. And we definitely do the, like, we're going to spend $100. Like, let's go get some, go to someplace, get something nice and grab a movie. So I wouldn't say it's like one big one, because I definitely, like, every 2 weeks minimum want to be going on a date, want to be getting out. So that's not what I'm doing, but I don't know, I'm not the quintessential, like, dink couple, no kids, going out, maybe one big splurge. So I don't know that that's necessarily the experience I'm having, but I don't know if I'm the target audience for that either.
Yeah, that's such an interesting theory. For me, I mean, it's kind of, I put my eating out into two different buckets. There's the utility places and utility nights where I'm just like, I don't have the capacity to cook. I'm tired, or I just don't feel like it. And those are usually, like the old standbys. And I'm going to spend, $50 max for my husband and me. But then there's also, I think we have started to do a little bit more of the special date nights out. Now, I wouldn't say we're doing $300. That's a little out of my price range, but there is an element of like trying to up the experience and have it be truly special. And perhaps I wonder if like right after COVID, like there was like the revenge travel, there was the revenge eating out. Like everybody's like, I'm just going to eat out all the time. And people maybe are pulling back from that because they got to do that. And also maybe their budget was starting to suffer a little bit. Perhaps there's multiple factors involved in this.
Mm-hmm. On the money spending habits thing, I think that as our resident downtown rat, I like my apartment is small, and I like one of the trade-offs for that is living in a like very walkable downtown area. And so that's like a very conscious budget decision that I've made. And so I probably do eat out more than like the average Boisean. I'm sure I do, in fact. And that's something that's like a conscious decision that I've made. And so I definitely don't resonate with what Art mentioned there about like kind of being a couple and going to $200 to $300 a month. But at the same time, based on what I'm seeing at restaurants, like there's a core group of like downtown restaurants that I think are being really successful this year and that I always see are packed. And then it's like everybody else almost seems like they're struggling.
So I'm curious what both of you think about all the closures we've seen this year. We've been talking about the restaurants that are making it, thriving, or surviving, but we've also had some significant closures this year too. Is there a trend there that people should be worried about? Is this, a couple one-offs, some weird situations, or are these closures indicative of maybe something broader happening?
Yeah. I'm kind of not seeing a true trend at this stage. Like I'm thinking about like Juniper closed on 8th Street, back to downtown earlier this year. And, for various reasons, it had been open for many years, really, and kind of marked like a pivot point in like the mid 2010s with real growth that was starting to happen, but it was still pre the like COVID exponential growth. And then, very quickly, that space, it didn't stay, empty for long. Rustica went in where Juniper closed with the same people that own Wild Root, St. Lawrence Gridiron. So I'm seeing some churn, certainly. But I'm not necessarily seeing like a major trend that's totally worrying. Although I will say, when I asked both Tara Morgan from Susina and Dave Crick from Bitter Creek, Red Feather and Diablo and Sons, when they see these closures, what do they think? And they both said, you pay attention and you get, a pit in your stomach and you feel bad for the people that lost their business or whatever they went through. And it makes you wonder if something's going on. So I think for the restaurateurs, they're always looking over their shoulder going, what's happening over there?
Yeah. And there were a lot of kind of individual personnel issues that caused a lot of the closures this year. And at the same time, like, that to me is a trend. Like that's normal in the restaurant industry. So I think that I don't know. It's hard to know whether that we've necessarily had more restaurant closures this year than the year before. Like we're not looking at like a good data set on that. But it is a little bit worrying to me because what I'm flagging is small, even local owner groups that are owning more restaurants and one-off individually locally owned businesses becoming a little bit rarer and rarer. And that's worrying to me.
Do you think this is going to be a new trend where these restaurant groups are the future of the restaurant business and it's going to be really difficult for these one-off, people who own one restaurant? It's just going to be really tricky for them?
Yeah, I think that these restaurant groups are becoming more common because they kind of share a DNA across their restaurants. So, I mean, let's just name like Wilder Hospitality Group, to me, is kind of the big winner right now in Boise's restaurant scene. I think that, okay, so they're the Wilder, the Percy, Wild Child up on the bench. They have a new taco shop coming up in Garden City next to Push and Pour, and Certified in the Hyde Park, Roosevelt Market in the East End. I think that's all of them, but they've got kind of a corner in almost every market now. Mm-hmm. And they're doing different things, but like I said, they have a shared DNA across their restaurants. And they've kind of figured out something that can click in each specific neighborhood, in each location, that can really make people happy. And they're always busy. That really speaks to the comfortability thing. And I'll be honest, like I said, this concerns me about these, groups owning more and more restaurants, because it takes away some creativity, it takes away some diversity. And they're really successful. And I'm going there. I'm saying this, but you will see me at those restaurants because they are consistent, they're comfortable, and they're good. They're quality. They know what they're doing. They've figured something out, and they're successful for a reason. And at the same time, it is worrying. And this brings up another kind of question that I have, which is, so obviously we have the big corporate chains that are moving in, which that's ultimately the big bad of this whole scenario. We all lose when the local restaurateurs lose out. That's just a fact. And so we want local ownership, and that's very important. But I think maybe we're seeing in the local economy a bit of a divide between the local big dogs and the local small dogs. And then all of these people are competing with the big national chains. So it's kind of this big mess that I do not envy any restaurateur. But I think that we might be seeing a bigger division between the, people who are able to own multiple local restaurants and the people who are just trying to start up one and make it stick.
I hear your point, Blake, but I also think that I'd rather see it be a local group that's doing things than
I know. You're right. Yeah,
a
same.
non-local
Me too.
group, right? And so, I think about, the Hotel Renegade when they opened, as exciting as that is, and it was a big deal this year. They opened their Highlander rooftop bar, the Baraboo Supper Club, the Blue Collar Coffee, which is definitely not blue collar because the coffee is expensive. They, when they came in, there was some concern in the local scene because this is a Wisconsin-based company that was seeing Boise as, ooh, Boise's on all these lists. Look at what's going on in Boise. What is this community? What do they need? We think we know what they need, and we're going to build something there. Good for them. And, good food, whatever, good drinks, blah, blah, blah. That's great. It's another place. It's another option. But I think for some local restaurateurs, they see that kind of a move, and they're not the only ones, but that's an example from this year that did come about, and go, what does this mean? Because I can't compete at the same level for what I pay my workers, for the insurance that these out-of-state companies can offer. And I see both sides of that equation, because, of course, as a worker, you want to have the best coverage and the best pay possible.
Totally.
But for the local scene, what does it mean for those folks who've been in Boise or who are building something unique that is truly Boise grown?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a spectrum there where, like you mentioned, Blake, yes, where we're seeing all of these national chains, the 52 chicken restaurants in Meridian that have just come in and taken over, and all of these chain restaurants, that's on one end of that spectrum, while, the family-owned restaurant is on the other. And so it is kind of this in between where, like you also said, I'm not against these groups of local chains, but there is limited diversity in what is available in them. They're similar types of food. It's not usually a unique idea. It's a play off something that they've previously done. So I think there are a lot of things to consider, and it isn't an easy, this is good, this is bad, this is positive, this is negative. There's pros and cons throughout that entire spectrum.
I also don't know, though, to be honest, that Boise is really ready for really diverse food. The reason why these are successful is because they're meeting Boiseans where they are. And I think we've heard from chefs like Cal Elliott, who opened the Avery, that, he's trying to give people things in Boise that they're scared of. And some people are ready for that. Some people want to try something new, and a lot of people don't.
I don't want to hear that though, Frankie.
Yeah,
I'm
like,
I want the
I
exciting
don't
stuff.
think
Yeah.
so. Look at these restaurants that are
I
bringing
know.
different things, and I love them. But
Yeah. I think
yeah.
the three of us love them, but yeah, I think we're seeing the market reflect what people want en masse.
But it's our job to think about this stuff, and a lot of other people have different jobs where they're just like, you know what, I need something comfortable, I need something familiar. So
Totally.
Yeah. Maybe this is our ability to push that envelope a little bit and hopefully make space for that diversity, or for people in Boise to think about this in maybe a little bit different way. Do we need another burger spot, or do we need something different? So I'm curious, what are both of you anticipating for Boise's food scene in the new year? What's coming up? What do you want to see? What do you think is likely? And will there be any new trends this year?
I want to see more chefs on the James Beard list, and I want to see Sal Alamia from Amano win. He's been a nominee many times. Of course, we had Chris Kamori from Kin win a couple years ago, which was huge. And that was the first Idaho chef to win, what's called the Oscars of the food world. And I also think I'd like to see, I would love to see more ownership of restaurants closer to the downtown core that are owned by refugees and are bringing food. Speaking of diverse food palettes, of food that, Boiseans are willing to try and excited to try, but also might push the envelope a little bit. I think of Kibrams on State Street and how exciting that place is. I always have a good meal there. Would love to see more of that closer to downtown.
Yeah, I think of like Sunshine Spice as being kind of like another golden child of that.
And they opened their spot this year downtown, which is that's a big deal.
It is a big deal. I think one of the things that I see forthcoming, I kind of shook my finger for a long time at the Warehouse Food Hall just because I don't like the aesthetic in there. I'm so sorry to everybody. But I think it's become a really useful way for people to kind of get their footing as new restaurants. And I want to see a lot more of that. I think that maybe Boise's getting big enough that we can now handle where the creative market comes in the restaurant is in pop-ups. It's in micro kitchens. It's in things like food halls. I want to see more of that, and I want to see Boise like really respond to it, because I think that it lets you as the consumer and the eater in and feel like you're part of something special. And that's what a foodie culture thrives on, is the feeling that like, ooh, I got this, you have to go get it. I want more of that in Boise, because we have too many. This is my other prediction or manifestation for 2025, is that we need less half committed kind of Italian places downtown. I'm so tired of it.
Oh my gosh, yes, please, thank
Why are they
you.
all
I'm
successful?
so tired of it.
They're not good. I mean, like, I feel like everybody's like, oh, everybody can do a pasta. You can't do a pasta. Like, you can make a pasta, but it's not good. So I think that we should try to, all of us, commit to like supporting pop-ups and really creative spots in 2025.
Thank you both so much. I think this was a great discussion, and I, as always, loved talking about food. So thank you both for coming on to have this conversation with me.
Happy eating in 2025.
Yeah, I'm definitely hungry now. So thanks to you both.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe to our Hey Boise newsletter to keep tabs on the restaurants opening in the new year. We'll be back tomorrow morning with our Friday News Roundup. Catch you then.